So yeah, so we started in February of 2023, and twice a month we met for going through Capital Volume 1, basically line by line. So information about that group is on the website. We had our last session of 2023 last night. So I can't remember, like 19 sessions, which is an accomplishment because who wants to come listen to Capital commentary for that long? But in 2024, we're going to move away from capital and really get at one of the questions that most of the people, I think, who encounter Marx are interested in, which is, what does he have to say about non-capitalist societies, and what might a non-capitalist society look like? This also relates to folks like Wendell Berry. So there's a spattering of books up here. We're going to read selections from several of Marx's texts, all the way from the Communist Manifesto, where he has some pretty ethnocentric things to say about Asia and the German ideology, where there's this classic ancient society, feudal society, capitalist society, this dialectical evolutionary line, on up to his later work, where, for example, in 1950s, and then with the Grundrisse, and then in the 60s with Capital, and then in the end of his life, which is now just published as notebooks, he actually totally rejected this evolutionary framework that a lot of people identify him for. So to the point where he would actually really critique these folks who tended to embrace some sort of dialectical materialist evolution, that all societies have to pass through these stages, and once they do, revolution will come, then we'll be in socialist communist paradise. He was really critical of this, and I just put two quotes up here as we've been going through Capital. The first one is that, with the driest naivete, Bentham assumes that the modern petit bourgeois, especially the English petit bourgeois, is the normal human. Whatever is useful to this particular kind of normal person in their world is useful in and for itself. He applies this yardstick to the past, present, and future. So you can see that part of Marx's critique in Capital, for those of you who've been to the group or are interested, part of his critique in Capital is that the bourgeois political economists took these categories and made them transhistorical. You remove them from any sort of history, so they existed outside of time and space. They're just natural categories. So fundamental to Marx's critique and his project is some sort of concern with non-capitalist societies. Clearly, he doesn't make this critique of Bentham without having some idea of non-capitalist societies already. And then the very first sentence of the book, which is, the wealth of societies in which capitalist mode of production prevails appears as an immense collection of commodities. Again, in this sentence, he's pointing to societies and forms of life where wealth looks like something other than commodities, where it might look like something like beauty, like friendship, like care for the land. The list could go on. And so the second bit here is just, what are we going to do in this group? In addition to reading from Marx, I'll offer commentary and presentations on some secondary sources. So things like Silvia Federici talking about witch hunts as they're related to primitive accumulation, some archaeological and historical work on pre-capitalist modes of production, Claude Meillassoux on value production and development in Africa. And then the four questions that will really drive the Marx reading group in 2024 will be, how did Marx's understanding of non-capitalist societies change through time? Right, from this evolutionary framework where he actually saw, for example, peasant societies as needing to go through capitalism to get to socialism, to by the end of his life, he thought this was an idiotic thing for anyone to think. And then, how did his understanding of non-capitalist societies influence his theoretical exposition of the logic of capitalism? That relates to the first two quotes I read on the previous slide. And then, how does our view of Marx as a non-evolutionary social thinker change our understanding of Marxian politics? So, for example, if we don't think there's this series of stages that we pass through and that we're on some sort of linear developmental trajectory, what does that mean for anti-capitalist politics? It might mean something like what Spencer and Emily are doing at the John Paul II farm is actually a viable anti-capitalist or non-capitalist practice, whereas most folks who are capitalist socialists would say that's not the case, or something like friendship, or something like traditional family bonds. And then the last question, which is, as I said, I guess last night, this is like what I'm hoping, I guess, will be the sexy hook that everybody wants to know. What might a non-capitalist society look like in the 21st century? Marx was concerned with these ideas in the late 1880s. That's like 150 years ago. So how can we make them relevant to today? So
Thank you for explaining all that. And, Jacob's group meets every other week, typically, approximately 2 times a month. I've been to almost every session of this last year, and I've learned a lot, and I would recommend it. No holds barred. I recommend it. It's really good. You will learn a lot.